Moderation for the panel today. Thank you once again for agreeing on the same, and we'll be ready in the next few minutes. Thank you.
I think we have, let's see, we have about 50 minutes. I guess, no, 10, 20, 11, 30. We have 70 minutes. So I think I would give you each, a good amount of time, if you like, up to 10 minutes to speak, and then we'll get more into Q&A type thing.
All right, so I just got a consensus from the team that we'll be starting right now without him. In case if he's joining, he'll be joining in the mid. So Dr. Ziad, please take a note on the same. Meanwhile, I'll just be telling the team to start the live. So for the time being, we just request you to please be on mute. Once we've done the live, we'll have you all online. Thank you.
Good morning again, and thank you very much for joining us.
I'll be opening it again, and then I'll pass it on to you.
Okay.
Thank you. So meanwhile, I'll just request all our speakers and our panelists for today just to turn off the video. Once I'll just come live, I'll introduce everyone, then please feel free to turn it on. Thank you. Dr. Eyup, requesting you to turn off the video, please. Engineer Loay, welcome, requesting to please turn off the video. We're just going live. Thank you. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Well, we hope you all had a great networking session. Well, it is now time for our topic on legislative and institutional framework for partnership contract, which marks as the first panel discussion of the conference today. Well, for the moderator, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Ziad Alexandre Hayek again to chair this panel. As a reminder, Dr. Hayek is the president of the World Association of PPP Units and Professionals and the vice chair of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, a working party on PPP. I'm also pleased to welcome prominent PPP leaders and specialists today, Engineer Atter Hannoura, Director of the PPP Central Unit at the Ministry of Finance in Egypt. We also have Dr. Eyup Vural Aydin, the chairman of Istanbul PPP Center of Excellence in Turkey. We're also joined by Engineer Loay Ghazaleh, the Undersecretary Advisor on Major Infrastructure and PPP at the Ministry of Works in Bahrain. And we also have Engineer Nayef AlHaddad, the Manager of Research and Strategic Planning of the Risk Compliance Office in the Kuwait Authority for Partnership Projects, which is the KAPP. Well, with this, I'd now like to humbly invite on the stage and screen all our esteemed panelists. Thank you for joining us today and giving us your valuable time. With this, I'd like to now pass on the live baton to our moderator and our chair, our session chair, Dr. Ziad, to take it forth with his panel. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Bhavana. Really delighted to be here today and continuing this conference with wonderful panel of really outstanding experts, people I've worked with and I think very, very highly of. And this opinion is shared by many, many people I know in the PPP community. So it is an honor and a pleasure to welcome Atter Hannoura and Eyup Vural Aydin and Loay Ghazaleh and Nayef AlHaddad. So we have a lot to talk about, and I think the title of the panel is Legislative and Institutional Framework for Partnerships. This is a general title. What I believe is more important is to understand from the experience of these experts what they think are lessons learned about PPP, what they think is important to make a PPP program and PPP projects successful in a country, and as well as what are some of the lessons learned of things not to repeat. You know, what are the things that can go wrong, that may have gone wrong, that they have learned from. So without further ado, I turn over first to Dr. Atter Hannoura, whom has an experience in Egypt that started many years ago. He has seen the kinds of projects that can work and those that cannot work. And Atter, over to you to enlighten us and the audience about what are the lessons, really, legislative and otherwise.
Thank you, Ziad. Thank you for having us on this panel. Actually, for the we've been working in Egypt for the last 15 years on PPs. We started actually in the end of 2006, and we started our first attempt for project on the 2007, and we had our law issued in May 2010. In this regard, I want to tell you our experience in having a law, because there was a lot of debate in the very beginning when we started, after we had a lot of training. And by the way, the more we take training, the more we feel how ignorant are we in the PP area. So it's an experience and experience and experience on the PPs. For the law, the debate was going in this way. Shall we do our legislative framework, our law, or amend our existing laws to have a legal umbrella to work our projects under, or to start a PP project with a minor amendment to the procurement law that would allow us to tender long-term projects under the procurement law, and capture all the lessons learned from one or two projects, and then draft or write out our law. This debate took something like 2 or 3 months with different consultation from other people, and we ended up by amending the procurement law that would allow us to tender out some of the PP projects and put in the PV tender documents all the legislative issues that we want to capture in the contract, in the document, then capture the experience, go through a practical tender once or twice, and then we include all that as we start drafting our law. Actually, this was the issue that we took, or the path that we took, and actually it ended up after 3 years of drafting the law. It started with 78 articles and then diminished to 39 articles with executive regulation. The lessons learned from this is that when we put our law, after an experience of practical tendering and practical financing and failure of one project and success of 2 projects, then we drafted a law that is up and live for the last 10 years, working with the law perfectly. And actually, a lot of countries in the region and in Africa took from this law because it is a practical law. This does not mean that the law will keep stagnant, and this is the law that we have. It's not the Bible. Actually, as we are talking, we are running now at the Parliament an amendment to the law. Amendment to the law that we had after 10 years of practical experience. Actually, in Egypt, we call ourselves that we had a condensed experience. Through our PP life, we had 2 revolutions. We had political instability. We had economical instability. We have flotation of the Egyptian pound against the hard currency, the dollars and the euros, in November 2016. And we had a lot of issues. We got cabinets changing every 6 months or every 1 year with different opinions and different vision about the PPs and the private sector. So we went through all that in 10 years. So we gained a lot of experience, and we succeeded, me and the team working with me, to keep the PP alive in Egypt and working. Even we tendered some of the projects actually during the revolutions, between the 2 revolutions. However, the amendment that we are introducing to the Egyptian law, PP law, is regarding how can we make the procurement process faster? How can we make the cycle of the project, especially involving the line ministries? This is a very important thing, involving the line ministries into the PPP processes. Because in the beginning, they were depending completely on the central unit. You're the center of excellence, you know how to do it. We are not that much experienced, so you manage things. And by the time they enjoy leaving this responsibility to someone else. So this law, we are including them. We are building again the PPP satellite units at each line ministry. We are adding new procurement methods like the limited bids, the direct award, and the unsolicited bids, because we started only with the competitive, international competitive bidding. So we created a committee between the Ministry of Planning and the Ministry of Finance to create the pipeline and to check the feasibility studies. So all this was amendments of the law that we gained through the last years of implementing the law. Regarding the institutional framework or the institutional setup, I will go through it very quickly. We have in Egypt a hierarchy of institutional framework. It started with something called the PPP Supreme Committee, which is headed by the Prime Minister and with a permanent membership of 9 ministers: Minister of Finance, Minister of Planning, Minister of Legal Affairs, Minister of International Cooperation, Minister of Housing, Minister of Transportation, Minister of Governorates and Legal Affairs. So we've got 9 ministers and the Prime Minister, plus who is in my position, and the minister who's having the project discussed. The PPP's Supreme Committee actually is acting as PPP regulator of the project, of the PPP program in Egypt. They approve the projects or they refuse projects to be under PPP. They have the final word in the dispute resolution, either to go to the arbitration or courts or whatever. They have the final word in the structure of the project after presenting all the structures and all the indicators of the studies. So, and they monitor the process of implementation from a very high level. The second layer is the PPP Central Unit, which I'm working in, and it is located at the Ministry of Finance. The third layer are the PPP satellite units that we are creating or we are establishing in different ministries. And aside, there is the PPP, or the so-called the PPP pipeline committee, which is a joint committee between the Ministry of Planning and Ministry of Finance. And the plan of the selected PPP projects will also be presented to the Supreme Committee to approve, and then we go. Thank you for having the time, and sorry for being long.
Thank you very much, Atter. Thank you. This is an excellent explanation of your experience. Actually, at the UN, with the model law that we are developing, and hopefully will be approved later this month, it is more or less the kind of setup that we are proposing to have. So an interministerial committee that is really provides the oversight. And more importantly, I think than oversight is making sure that the PPP pipeline is in line with the SDG priorities of the country, so that, before many countries used to have the contracting authority, i.e. the line ministry, decide whether to do a project on a PPP basis or not, and which project to do. But we feel that there needs to be coordination, especially like if you look at the power sector, needs to be well coordinated with the water sector, water being one of the major consumers of power. with agricultural sector, agriculture being the major consumer of water, with the environment, because this is very important. So having an interministerial committee is providing oversight is very important. Obviously, having the PPP unit with as we say, teeth. In other words, with the ability to say yes or no. I mean, the PPP unit should not be just a consultative unit. And then also having what we are calling PPP teams, or you can call them PPP satellite units within the contracting authorities or the line ministries. So thank you very much for that. I will go to Dr. Eyup. Eyup, Turkey has had, like Egypt, many, many years of experience in PPP. So maybe take us through the Turkish experience in that regard, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ziad. Actually, it's really an honor for me to be a part of this first conference for Kuwait. Thank you for inviting me. And I am also very proud to working very closely with Ziad under the umbrella of WAP, which we gather all PPP experts around the world, which is really, really benefitful, fruitful for the PPP ecosystem. So let me summarize what Turkey reached so far in the legislation part of the PPP projects. Actually, as a PPP academician, as a PPP expert, let's say it a fan of PPP, I split 4 phases for a successful PPP project, which starts from the preparation, construction, operation, and handback process. Most of my lectures and my speech, I would like to stress on the operation phase, which is so important for delivering the public services to the people. But actually, what I tested, what I witnessed from 15 years of my experience in PPP field, the legislation process, the phase of the preparation is, I think, the crucial one. If you cannot handle, if you cannot manage the right way of your path for a successful PPP projects, it never work. What I seen so far. In Turkey, for example, we started in the healthcare PPP projects 2005, and we didn't even a legal framework or a legislation for PPP projects for public investment with private finance. We copied from the UK experience. It was more than 1,000 pages. And after 3 years, what we saw, so we changed all these legislation from UK experience, maybe more than 60%. So we localized the legislation for our needs, our requirements, and the expectations of our peoples. So the legislation is very important. So each country, each government should develop their own legislation, which fits the requirements of the people. Actually, this is my first lessons learned. The second one is actually still we have in Turkey, we have completed more than 152 mega PPP projects, more than $200 billion, but still we don't have a framework, an umbrella framework. So we have some legislation, different legislation, which control the line ministries. Maybe, yes, we need a coordination for all pipeline, but when you use the line ministries legislation, it means you can reach more fast than a control of the government. So this is one advantage side, and the disadvantage side, let's say it, we will evaluate it. So also this is very important. But in Turkey, again, I would like to give an example, very, very solid example. When it comes to 2007, everything was ready. We copied the legislation. We started the project, the tender launch, and 11 PPP hospital, city hospital tender launched at the same time. And the tenders awarded 2007, but the opposition goes to the Supreme Court and they block this process. So after the tender process, we should wait more than 3 years for the starting of the construction. So I would like to stress this one, why the legislation is so important for the countries. You can be ready, all details, all process, but if you don't have the proper legislation, and if you don't have the governance for the opposition, for the people, for the PR of the process, you cannot go ever. Even you have awarded, even you have got the companies, even you have the finance, the legislation comes, open the door. What we tested, actually, it was an expensive experience. We should wait for 3 years, and when we come to 2011, the government should change. The government coordinate with the opposition, with the people, with the Supreme Court, and we make the proper legislation, and then we will start for the construction. I think till now it's enough for me. I don't want to go for long, but this is the first experience from Turkish side.
Thank you very much, Eyup. Certainly quite a roller coaster ride without the legislative framework, but you've managed to do very well. And I think there's a lot of, maybe we can hear from you a bit later on about what the pipeline for PPP projects looks like in Turkey at this point. And in general terms, some sectors where PPP is heading. Loay, Ghazaleh, you're responsible for PPP in Bahrain. You have a very important job there, and really with a lot of expertise. So maybe you take us through the not only the Bahraini experience, but if you also like, you can expand on your experience overall.
Thank you, Dr. Ziad. Bahrain is a small country. It's not like Egypt or forward-looking country like Kuwait. We don't have a public-private partnership law, but we're operating under similar arrangements. In Bahrain, all projects strategic from line ministries go to a committee. This committee, we call it Project Development and Infrastructure Projects. They filter the project from a strategic perspective without considering the finance. How important is it to the country? Do we need to do it? What economic benefits will generate from this project, etc. And then they make a subset of these projects and they send it to the Ministry of Finance. The Ministry of Finance, for them, it's a list to do or a list to finance, and they decide which project can be financed from the government budget, which should be financed from short-term loans, which should be financed as a public-private partnerships. So very much the cycle is locked for Bahrain. Line ministries propose to infrastructure committee forwards to Ministry of Finance to arrange for the financing. On the other hand, Bahrain have a very strong procurement law arranged by the tender board, which has been in action for the past 15 years. Tender law in Bahrain is very well established. The problem with the tender law, it is simplistic. They go for like best offer, best price, best public-private partnership. There is a multi-decision criteria involved, and the tender board is not equipped to deal with this. So many times we involve the Ministry of Finance to introduce financial concepts like net present value, loan tenor, balloon payments, all sorts of financial to make the project understandable to tender board, so that the selection of the preferred bidder will be easier, because it's not a straightforward process to select the preferred bidder and without being the lowest. So this is a difficult task. Tender law is probably will resolve this, but this is what we have to work with. The other component of the tender law which is missing in Bahrain, we have major issues in corridor allocations. Every line ministry is competing for every corridor in the country because the streets were designed to be small, and now with the expansion of infrastructure, corridors are limited, so we have so many corridor conflicts. Major obstacle in public-private partnerships. Developers, they would not want to accept taking the risk of way leaves or building permits, and they allocate this to the government. This is an issue that is expected to be resolved by the tender law. In the government, we undertook the risk of way leaves and building permits in the past project, but I think in the future, this has to slightly shift towards the developers. Very much in Bahrain, because it's a small country, we don't need so much to regulate the relationship between line ministries, Ministry of Finance, Public-Private Partnership Unit. But a unique issue to Bahrain is the competition between a constrained budget, because Bahrain have reached its ceiling debt. We cannot borrow more money on government budget without the parliament approval. And this is creating issues because the parliament will not sanction any additional funds to the government. So Ministry of Finance is very keen on having public-private partnerships off the government budget. And this is not easy to do in this global environment of cash constraints. Many of these models are on availability-based finance, and this will appear on the government budget. So this is creating an issue in terms of our limitation to expand our public-private partnership program. Other than this, we're doing okay. We're having slight issue with promoting public-private partnership project. This is why we're realizing on Bahrain Economic Development Board to promote these projects internationally. 2 times annually, they hold conferences to present these projects to the international investors. Many companies are interested, but the problem, the pipeline is short, and this is not a great incentive for somebody to come here and stay for 20, 30 years for one project only. So we're trying to increase the pipeline, to increase the investors' appetite to come to Bahrain. At the same time, we're shifting to export credit agencies for finance, because this is an easier finance pool to tap in compared to finance through consortiums. Of course, we're limited with export credit agencies to securing materials from their home countries, but we're doing fine with UK, we're doing fine with Korea. Many countries have strong export finance banks that are jumping in to assist in this perspective. Likely, we will be having a public-private partnership law within the next year or so. Probably we will mimic Dubai and Kuwait laws in this respect. Dubai law is very focused on the relationship between the line ministries and the Ministry of Finance, who initiate what and what authorities the line ministries have. Ours will be wider. It will jump into issues like how to evaluate public-private partnership connected to the procurement law. We will be more into the Kuwait model and the Egyptian model in this respect. Other than this, everything is great in Bahrain.
Thank you very much, Loay. Thank you. This is a fantastic overview of what is going on in Bahrain, and very, very interesting what you're saying, that being a small country, the need for perhaps a lot of structure may not necessarily be needed, but obviously there is a need for better understanding perhaps of PPP overall. One of the things, for example, is has to do with whether an entity, how PPP is viewed by the Ministry of Finance and by the government. And it used to be traditionally PPP units were created within the Ministry of Finance because value for money was the most important element in analyzing a PPP project. Should I fund this project with public money, or should I go to the private sector to fund it? And how I analyze the value for money becomes very important. Nowadays, I think we're moving away from that. We're saying, yes, value for money is important. It has to be there, no question about it, but it is not sufficient. We need to look at value for people. And that involves the whole ESG dimension. But even beyond that, some of our members in WAP are developing what we call the value for future generations, because these projects can be 25, 30 years, sometimes even longer. And so it's not only the effect on today as society, but the effect on future generations and what that's going to do. Actually, very interesting mathematical models, which I encourage everybody to look into, and let us know if we can help with providing more information on that. I will there's another thing that you mentioned that's interesting, and maybe we come back to it later on, which is the government budget. The government has reached its ceiling of indebtedness, and how to continue to finance PPP projects. When de facto many of these projects need to have availability support, and so therefore put some sort of a contingent liability, if nothing else, on the government's books. So before we do that, I will go to Nayef AlHaddad, and Nayef, I was in Dubai recently at the PPP conference there and met Ms. Fadila Al-Hassan, and I was very, very impressed by her. I was very impressed by how she approached the whole concept of PPP, and she told us about what you guys are doing in Kuwait. Would love to hear from you about this and about all those aspects. Please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you, Dr. Ziad. And I'd like also to say hi to my fellow colleagues and expertise. Long time no see, especially, Mr. Engineer Loay. I haven't seen you since Oman conference 2 years ago. Today, I'm not going to talk right now about like the Kuwait experience. I'll talk about like the things we have learned from the Kuwait experience, and about like, how to shape, a PPP project or a contract, or like I would say the framework, like in any state right now, from like what we have learned. So, for the last 2 days I've been thinking, and there's like, I would say a rule of three. There are like 3 elements which you need for like maybe for a contract or like for a project. The first one is the framework, which is like, we talk about like facts and existing factors within the state itself. We talk about like governing laws and guidelines, which already exist in the state. We talk about like identification of stakeholders, those who are like involved within a certain PPP project. And we talk about like the country profile and the project profile. So when we talk about like, for example, the country profile, we talk about like, is this like a local project or like a federal, for example? What's the track record of the state in developing such projects? What's the risk level doing the state? There's a pipeline. So this is one of the things which are like, pre-existing factors you cannot change. You just have to take into account when like you're developing such a project or maybe you're shaping in a contract. The second thing we talk about like the host, which is a PPP unit, whether like, if it's a central unit, or like, was it like maybe for like example, a BART for like a line ministry. So this unit or this host, does it have an identifying role? What's the role? Is it like advisory, or like, is it tendering? For example, I've read like in many places, some years are like just mainly advisory, like, Dr. Ziad had mentioned, some of them may have, authority, like partial authority, like overall authority. Is it a one window shop where you could do it like, it's from all across the project? Does the unit have the capability and the vision? Does it have the knowledge, the skills, the budget to carry such a project? And the versatility. Now, when we talk about like versatility, this is one of the things, So we talk about like advocacy, talk about like, having a knowledge base, and being a I would say on an arm's length, distance from the both P's, the public and the private, to be in a position where like, it could be a matchmaker between them. And of course, there's a need of the dialogue. And this is one of the things we have been doing in the last couple of 3 to 4 years right now, even at KAPP. There is a continuous periodic dialogue with the public and with the private. We sit down and listen to them. Because in the end, this is an investment opportunity. This is not a state-sponsored project. This is not an EDC project. This is the mentality they have to understand and appreciate it. The last factor I would like to mention, which is the environment. And, I believe, Mr. Dr. Eyup, when he mentioned some war stories that happened in Turkey, from like all the things, So one of the things we talk about like environment, we talk about like local and global market status during the time shaping this contract or shaping of this project. We talk about like oil prices, we don't talk about like, political economic, cases, some like positive or some like have negative, like, effects on such a project at such a time. The second thing is like the local environment. So I would put it like a slogan: hospitality versus hostility. And that's when we talk about like a project. Yeah, like, you know, so is the state, how is the state level of ease of doing business? How progressive is the legislation? You know, is the state is endorsing FDIs and PPPs? Now that's like, you know, that's one of the things that we talk about, like the local environment. You know, is it easy to establish an SPV? How long does it take? You know, so, and the last one, which is like, I believe everybody almost mentioned, the political and the public support. If you don't have that, you'll be swimming against the tide, or you'll be exhausted till you run out of fuel, you know? So you have to be like, that's why, like I mentioned, like, you know, one of the factors has to be like in the host or the PPP unit, you have to be versatile. You have to know like when to lay low, you have to be like when we be defensive, and you have to know like, you know, when you have the political support. And believe me, what I mentioned here is just like, not like only the ideology. This is like, you know, lessons that I have learned across the time to determine like over the time, do we need to modify your legislation over time? How long does it take? You know, like what is the best time to modify your legislation? How to reshape your units? You know, sometimes, you know, in some places they call a PPP unit a centralized PPP unit. They will call it a bottleneck for like maybe failing on meeting its capabilities and abilities to tender a project. And sometimes even like, you know, I would say when there's a satellite unit across the line ministries, you'll see a lot of discrepancies across PPP projects and contracts, which will cause confusion and also misalignment about like the saturation of I would say the local market to absorb all these you know, projects at the same time. I just try to make it as short as possible, so just to give more space for, you know, more discussion. Thank you, Dr. Ziad.
Thank you. This is very impressive. I'm really very impressed by your global capturing of all the important ideas that are necessary. PPP is something very complex, and PPP units, the reason for having PPP units, many people forget. It's like, why do you need a PPP unit? It's not only because, you know, you cannot develop some expertise in line ministries. Of course you can. I mean, you can send people to attend the CP3P program, and they can all get certified, CP3P certified. Does that make them capable of managing PPP projects? I look at PPP units and I say, what is the expertise that's required from a, call it PPP unit or any agency, but let's say PPP unit within a government? What do they need to, what expertise do they need to have? Well, they need to have financial expertise, because they need to be able to do financial modeling. They need to be able to do value for money analysis. They need to be able to understand what the various types of bids they may receive for projects, because it's going to be apples and oranges, given that it is PPP. They need to have legal expertise, whether it has to do with legal due diligence or whether it has to do with what type of projects they can design and how they can design it, and what are some of the requirements of lawyers of the private sector. They need to have technical expertise, because yes, of course, the technical expertise is within a particular line ministry, but if the person that's working on the PPP projects and the design, etc., does not understand the technical aspect, they are not going to be able to actually do a good job. They need to have environmental expertise, at least be able to deal with environmental consultants, understand what the concepts are, how they should be applied. They need to have social expertise for social impact analysis, and be able to understand, you know, if you're building an airport, what is the effect on the neighborhood, etc. And this is just a simple example. They need to have political expertise, because managing inside the government and knowing who to talk to, and as you're saying, Nayef, championship and support, you know, whether you Atter is smiling. I know we have all lived this. So you need to have real political sharpness and expertise. You need to know policy. You know, it's not only developing a project. It is, what is your policy for your PPP pipeline? What is your policy for SDGs and development, etc. You need to have experience in programs, program management. You need to have expertise in project management, whether it is a project design, project planning, and eventually project oversight. Because you need to help the contracting agency or authority with that. You need to have local expertise, obviously. You need this country where you're working, but you also need to have international expertise because you're dealing with investors from many countries. Sometimes you need to have people that speak many languages. Of course, English has become the international language, but still it is very important to be able to attract investors from other parts of the world, etc. So really a PPP unit is a complex endeavor and not an easy one at all. So that's why we say that it should not be only a consulting role. If it is only in a consulting role, what happens in many countries is that the line ministries are so powerful because the minister sits in the Council of Ministers. They say, oh, the PPP unit, they gave us that advice, but it's just like an internal consultant. We hear them, we listen to them, but then we do what we want. And obviously this has not led to good PPP practice. I'd like to come back to you, Atter, and maybe your reaction to all what you've heard from the other panelists and from me. Maybe talk a little bit about how you are dealing with financing PPP projects, what constraints on your budget they are having, and what is the budget of your PPP unit like for project preparation, how you're dealing with that?
Actually, this is one of the main challenges that not only we are facing, but I think that most of the PP units are facing, which is the financing, the most important phase of the project, which is the project preparation phase, which includes the pre-feasibility studies and the feasibility studies and all kind of studies to be able to structure and design a project properly. So when you can push it to the market, it's attracts the appetite of the investors and operators and the banks as well. We have budget. Actually, this was one of the issues that was included in the amendments of the law because we suffered from it in the last 15 years. In our amendment of the law, there should be a budget allocated from the Ministry of Planning and Ministry of Financing to each and every line ministry for the studies of the pre-feasibility studies of the PP projects. Aside from that, we get money from the IFIs not in terms of a donation, it's not there anymore, but through the different programs that different IFIs have, like the IPPF or the PFI of the African Development Bank and the World Bank, and the Asian Development Bank has got another program. So we use these programs. We are heavily using the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development program, which is the PIF, because actually they finance the advisors. The advisors come and work with us, paid by them upon our approval of each deliverable. And by the end of the day, we put this amount, not all the amount not all the money of the advisors, but almost 60-70% of it, as a success fee. For the successful bidder, will be paying back to the EBRD or to the sponsor of the project. So this money is revolving as we go. This is one of the way that we use from the different donors and the money for the within the budget that we have in each and every line ministry. The ministry, the Ppp Central Unit by itself, sometimes we need some quick money to do a part of a feasibility study or an environmental pre-study before we do the initial screening, would this project go or no go, we use the money of the budget that we have at the PPP Central Unit. The PPP Central Unit receives their money from different sources. Number one, the budget. Number two, the grants that we get sometimes from different donors. However, these grants are earmarked, so we can use it only in different specific project or specific way. The third thing is the consultation that we give out to the different countries, or even some entities in Egypt, and we get fees against that. And this fees is either starts from zero up to some $1,000, which is identified or calculated by the Ministry of Finance. So these are the sources of money that we have, and this is the budget that we work with. I want to elaborate on something important that you just mentioned regarding the PPP Central Unit and the PPP satellite units. What we are pushing now heavily at the PPP satellite units, given that the number of projects that the PPP Central Unit is managing now, which is getting to be a load in managing projects, is the concept of the contract management, which we want to pass to the satellite units. And part of it will be at the PPP Central Unit, but the Central Unit here will be as a silent monitoring. We put in each and every contract in our contracts that any correspondence between the service provider and the line ministry, just put the PPP Central Unit on the CC. We just on the CC to know what's going on, to see if there's any party, the government party or the private sector is misusing or abusing the articles, or start trying to go around, or there's misunderstanding of an article in the contract, and they're both of them are working against it wrongly. So we just monitor. If there is something wrong, we just interfere with the line ministry and tell them that please take care of this, take care of that. But what we are doing currently is trying to pass the concept of the contract management. As you just mentioned, Dr. Ziad, that contract management is completely different than project management. When the project is long-term, like ours, PPs, then contract management is the name of the game. And in this case, as Dr. Ziad just mentioned, you need multi-capacity, legal, financial, technical, political, all this, environmental. You're managing contract, which is a compound contract, sophisticated, as we usually say. Okay, so it needs understanding of a contract management, because the perfect contract management is that you can predict the problem earlier before the event, if it happens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting that you are being creative in finding ways to finance the project studies. This is awesome. Sometimes the parties that provide funding for the studies sort of oblige you to work with certain consultants. Are you facing this, or you have your freedom about choosing who you would like to work with?
Look, we have to be frank on this. The entity that's paying dictates the procurement procedures. However, we agreed with all donors or all programs that we're working with IFIs that we will put the terms of reference and the capabilities and the references that we need. Okay, and if one of the things that took a lot of debate with some of the IFIs was that we need to have an Egyptian or Arabic speaking consultant along with the international consultant, and this was against the procurement system. So I need international legal consultants, okay, with the experience of the PPs in this sector and so on. So, but I need as well the local or the domestic office, legal office, because the core contracts and documents are bilingual. The Arabic language is the prevailing language. Contracts are not translated. Contracts are redrafted in another language. So we need to have this Arabic-speaking consultant from day one. So we insisted on that, and actually we refused one of the funds who actually didn't agree with us on that. And thank you very much. You jeopardized our project. And actually, we have this done. So the terms of reference that we put together is the terms of reference that are managed. We are members of the committee selecting the evaluating the bids from the consultants, and it's done on a very, very transparent way, unless one of the bidders is blacklisted in Egypt one or another. So we say it upfront.
Dr. Eyup, situation in Turkey with the matter of financing. Turkey has deep capital markets, but also has had major financial problems. So how is Turkey dealing with the financing of project studies, but also eventually of where's the money for PPP projects coming from at this stage?
Thank you, Ziad. Before coming to the financial part, actually, I would like to share some insight related to PPP units and the items that you listed, which is very important technically, legally, financially. So we need all those experts. Ironically, in Turkey, we don't have, a PPP unit yet. So we have lots of projects, lots of line ministries and the companies, IFIs, MDBs, but we don't have a PPP unit. So all those projects actually managed by the line ministries, and let's say it's a small PPP unit under the umbrella of each line ministries, actually, which is not proper. There are some, threats about those procedures. The first one is very important because all those people who are working for the government and responsible for the PPP projects, actually they started to work with the private companies. So they know them, and the private companies started to know those people. And all the time in and around the world, the private company unfortunately pays more than the governments. So 1 or 2 years, when they know each other, so you can see those government people, the officials transfer to the private parties with all knowledge, all expertise and all experiences, which is really harmful for the public side. So the PPP units, maybe it's a very important role to coordinate, to collaborate, to collect as a knowledge of pool for the government, which is very important. So to keep the knowledge, not the people. So maybe based on the knowledge, based on the expertise, but not based on the people under the umbrella of line ministries. I think this is very important, but what I would like to stress. And the pipeline is Turkey last 10 years, it was amazing in terms of PPP. There are very successful projects, transports, airports, hospitals, ports, highways, tunnels, bridges, all of part of PPP project you can see on the ground. But unfortunately, because of the currency problem that we faced from 2016, the prices, increase a lot, and it's I don't want to use these words, but it's a sustainable increasing of the prices of the user fee. So all those finance comes from the MDBs. I think IFC last 10 years invested $10 billion, EBRD around $6 billion, ISTB to the hospitals, I think more than $4.5 million. So all those billion dollars came from the MDBs and in the hard currency. So the government should make a guarantee mechanism, not the local currency, but the hard currency. So because, the savings are not quite enough for Turkish infrastructure investment, and all the time we discuss, we told that the infrastructure is very important, is very related to the development of a country. So we need those infrastructure. We cannot, as a government, as a Turkish state, they cannot wait till they will have the enough saving for doing all those infrastructure. So we need the foreign finance. So, but unfortunately, the capital, I mean, the stock exchange and the internal saving are also not going to the infrastructure. It's not easy to allocate all these resources to the infrastructure, which is very complex. So the people now would like to invest in different area, even blockchain, not the infrastructure. So you cannot use the capital exchange for the infrastructure investment. But what is good, I think now we have a huge experience. Last 10 years, we did a lot. But when we go to the 2010, the government, the companies, the advisors, even the foreigner investors didn't know the Turkish PPP platform, or let's say it's a ecosystem in the country. But now we have a lot. All the time we told in the conferences, in the training programs, it's a learning doing process. When we go to the 2010, it's a learning process. We did all things in a blind way. But now there is a huge experience, huge knowledge, and that we can share with different countries. Now maybe we will shift it, not learning by doing, but learning by sharing with all our experiences, because all of our countries, all of our projects are on the different level. We can a lot things to learn each other. So maybe also WAP is very important for this coordination, for this exchanging of the knowledge, different level of the PPP projects in our countries.
Thank you very much, Eyup. Actually, I should say you have been extremely active, of course, as the chair of the WAP Central Asia chapter, Turkey and CIS region chapter, but also through your own organization, the Istanbul PPP Center of Excellence, where you have been sharing a lot of that expertise with Central Asian countries and African countries. And so yes, you've been doing a lot of that, and really the community appreciates this very much. Before I let you go, Nayef mentioned something that really, I think I'm going to quote him on this going forward. I think he just coined a good soundbite for PPP. He said, hospitality or hostility. So what is the situation like in Turkey, hospitality or hostility towards PPP to the public and by the government?
Yeah, it's not hospitality, yes. But I think this is not the problem of the people. This is problem of the governments and the public sides. So we should focus on it. As I mentioned, the programming of PPP projects are very important from the beginning. So in 2007, the government didn't know enough knowledge how they will manage the PPP projects, even legally, financially, technically, or process. And they missed one thing, which is very important: the PR, the public relation. First of all, you should make the public aware of what is going on. What is private finance? For example, in Turkey now, we have, Erdogan. Erdogan is a right politics, right side politics. So, but now in Turkey, the opposition, I mean the left side, is criticizing a lot because the people is paying for the infrastructure. But when you go to the back of modern PPP project, whom we will find? Tony Blair. Tony Blair is the new Labour leader of the UK. So this mechanism, I mean, this model is not belongs to the right politics. So I mean the governments, the people should know what is going on. What is the real philosophy of the PPP project? This is not the finding the proper finance. PPP is delivering quality public services, and in a short way, in a predictable way, and in a monitoring public services by the banks, by the private companies, by the government, and by the people. So I think these 4 items are very important. This is an auditing system of public services, not the finding the finance for your infrastructure projects.
Thank you very much. Loay, over to you for any reaction to what you've heard so far, and also a question regarding social infrastructure. Is Bahrain, knowing that maybe large infrastructure projects may be difficult now, is there any effort in Bahrain to do smaller infrastructure, social infrastructure, whether it's schools or hospitals or other projects like this on a PPP basis?
Thank you, Dr. Ziad. A quick comment on public-private partnership units. I like the Turkey model. I'm very impressed with the scope that you have laid out for what the public-private partnership units can do. I'm not in agreement with Dr. Atter with regard to assigning contract management to public-private partnership units. And I will conclude, I would leave you with something to remember similar to Mr. Nayef in Kuwait. BB units are created to resolve government conflicts. This is our philosophy in Bahrain. So this is a catching phrase maybe you can use in the future. With respect to small public-private partnerships in Bahrain, yes and no. Now we're working on 3 projects in the transport sector, Bahrain North Link Road, Bahrain LRT, and the King Fahd Causeway coming from Saudi Arabia. The 3 of them add up to between 7 and 8 billion US dollars. And the 3 of them are likely to be tendered in the next year almost at the same time from 3 separate entities. This is why the Bahrain is apprehensive, because this is a huge amount of money. Global banks would not invest so much money in one sector, that is the transport sector, especially after the COVID and the drop that we had seen in transportation. So we're trying to rethink the strategy of executing this project by segmentation, by breaking up them into phases, like initial phase, ultimate phase. We're still working on reducing the transaction size so that they can be bankable. So we still have mega projects in Bahrain. On the small scale, we're shifting more towards housing. Housing is the one sector in Bahrain that had done public-private partnerships, and they've done it through the traditional model and through deferred payment model. And we're continuing to do public-private partnership in the housing project. Other entities in Bahrain, they have their own brain, electricity and water authority. Since 30 years plus, they are working on public-private partnership for utility supply. They've executed expansion the last 3 years. It was a big expansion. So we're having a mix of both, mega and small public-private partnership projects. I'll leave you more time to ask more questions to others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe that Atter explained that when you have many projects, as Egypt does, it becomes very difficult for the PPP unit to manage all the contracts. So actually, we're talking about management of the contracts not during the tender process, but ongoing for the next 20 some years. Yeah. And you need the line units to line ministries.
Yeah.
If I go before we end, perhaps to Nayef, and Nayef, your reaction to what you've heard. How is Kuwait financing its project preparation? You've heard about the creativity that Atter talked about how that's being done in Egypt. Are you actively looking at doing all the preparation for projects to be ESG rated? Are you involved with rating agencies for ESG? Yeah, and I believe that, thank you for the hospitality versus hostility quote.
You're most welcome. Actually, this slogan, it came up from seeing all the trials we have gone through. Even like when you talk about like political issues, me and Engineer Atter, when we laughed about it, we've been through the same thing. It's just the mentality, the mindset. See, one of the issues, when we talk about when Dr. Eyup talked about the adoption of the PPP as a concept, if the state doesn't adopt these principles and doesn't communicate to the public, and there's an exchange and dialogue with the public to understand it. See, the way, just to give an example, for example, in Kuwait, the PPP law is a capitalist/socialist law. So the capital of I would say the capex of a project, if it exceeds a certain ceiling, it would be a stock joint IPO company, where like 50% is for the citizens to reap the fruits of, I would say, a guaranteed IRR over the tenure of the contract. Now, the public will be happy about this, but the problem is sometimes, everybody, including the politicians, they're looking at the apple, not the tree. They're looking at the stocks and the IPO. They're not looking at the project as, I would say, an added value to the society or the economy. That's one of the issues we have. That's why, we need dialogue and continuous effort from the state to resolve it. One of the issues we face, with the local financing, international financing in the banks, everybody's hungry. There's an appetite for it. But what they need to see is a state, I would say, guarantees. I'm talking about like commitment from the state, not canceling projects, to be politically supported and not to be politically influenced, or like I would say in other kind of ways, just to be, in any kind of way. One of the things we have seen also, when we talk about like drafting the contract has to be balanced in risk, allocation. And even I would say, bringing the public and the private on equal terms, and to be balanced. See, one of the issues we have seen here is the mindset of the public entity looking at the private sector when they're dealing with almost as an EPC contractor, as like a service provider, not as a partner in the long-term contract. This is where we need to find the balance between them. Like when, even in I talk about I would say dealing with bilingual contracts, there has to be, it has to be this environment that, both entities coexist in harmony and working for 25 years. And one of the issues we have learned also, and this just recently, line ministries need to develop on their own expertise when dealing with contract management. They need, if they don't have it, they have to acquire it, outsource it over time so they could absorb it. Because, in the end, the private sector have invested a lot of money and effort to acquire the best legal, technical, and financial advisory to manage this contract over time. So if they don't have these capabilities, the line ministries will always be on the end, I would say, on the failing side, when it goes to courts. That's one of the lessons we have learned.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Before ending this panel, I would like to invite all the participants, our audience, to consider joining WAP. WAP is the hub, the international hub for PPP. Today, 39 governments PPP units are members of WAP, and it has more than 250 individual and corporate members. So we have chapters, regional chapters for 7 regional chapters. One of them is the MENA region. We have sectoral chapters that are for airports and ports and healthcare and etc. And we have thematic chapters that involve legal, financial, project management, women in PPP, young people in PPP, all of many, many types of aspects. So it is a vibrant organization. I invite you to join it. And would like to end up by thanking my co-panelists for their really tremendously important insights. Thank you so much. And thank you for the audience for taking the time to listen to us today. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you once again. And what an excellent panel discussion was. And we got so many responses from the audience. So thank you for that. Thank you once again to all of you for your incredible time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Bye-bye, guys. See you in Istanbul.
Inshallah.
So ladies and gentlemen, after that excellent panel discussion, it is now time to break in for a short networking break. A video of our partners and sponsors will now play on the main stage, so we would urge your attention towards that. Also, we would urge you to now click on the Expo Hall tab on top of your screens to visit the sponsor booths. Please feel free to network with one another during the course of the event as we now break in for a short networking break, and we'll be resuming back at 12 Kuwait time for our next session, which is going to be coming up on the topic different PPP procurement systems, what not to do. So this is all happening at our wonderful event, and we'll see you back at 12 Kuwait time. Thank you for joining us.